When it comes to systems, you want something that will start showing results fast. You're looking for a tool that can enable your 3PL or warehouse to get to the next level. So why wait? That's why Carton Cloud provides supported, fast onboarding that can have your WMS up and running in hours, not months. Jump into Carton Cloud's easy-to-use workflows for all of your services, including cross-docking, serialized inventory tracking, e-commerce order fulfillment, and more. This software is built by logistics people for logistics people, and those logistics people are standing by to help train you and support you so that you can be successful with your customer. With 24/7 real-time reporting and free online training, you need to check out Carton Cloud for your operation. Take the next step in your operation by heading to cartoncloud.com/free-demo or click the link in the show notes.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Matt Hertz. He is the co-founder at Third Person and Second Marathon. He also has a great newsletter that I enjoy every week as well. So I'm excited to get him on. And we're going to talk about his journey within the e-commerce space and ultimately into logistics and fulfillment, and focusing on 3PL e-commerce brand relationships and how that kind of has all come about, and some of his experiences as an early employee at some very big e-commerce stores that we've all heard about and brands that we've all heard about, and just get his take on the industry overall. So Matt, very excited to have you on the show today. Welcome, and how are you?
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, this has kind of been like a dream to be on this podcast. You've chatted with a lot of good friends of mine, and companies I'm familiar with and work with and have been a customer of or a partner of. So it's really, really exciting to be interviewed by you today.
Definitely. I'm happy to have you on. Excited to have you on, and happy to hear that you're a listener too. I appreciate that. And, if I can make dreams come true, then I'm happy to do that. So it's great to get you on. So let's hear a little bit about your background, because you've been pretty involved in the e-commerce space and logistics fulfillment space for a while now. And I saw, as I was digging a little bit, I saw that you started selling sports cards and collectible things online, like very early. I saw like 1999, I think it was the start of that. And you even mentioned you survived the .com boom there. So tell us a little bit about kind of that beginning and how that ultimately got you into the logistics and e-commerce kind of fulfillment space.
Yeah, absolutely. Good research there, Kevin. And for the record, I still sell and buy and sell sports cards. I continue to sell on eBay primarily. I have a booth at the local Nashville show here in town. So yeah, I continue to be engaged in kind of real time, entrepreneurship. But to maybe rewind about 25 years, I started when I was living in Toronto in Canada. I think this is probably 7th grade, maybe 8th grade. Back in '99, I started buying and selling, sports cards. As a kid, I was always into sports and collecting, and many kids have trading cards growing up. And I guess one day I noticed that I had quite a few of them, and I was looking to get some cash for other means as a soon to be high schooler, and I started selling on actually Yahoo auctions, which probably predates some of your listeners, Kevin. eBay hadn't launched in Canada in 1999, certainly before PayPal and other e-payment forms. So but we had Yahoo auctions and in the mail. So I was buying and selling and walking over to my local bank around the corner, cashing, personal checks and money orders and depositing cash, which was sent in the mail back then. Maybe Canada was a little safer than the US, in terms of, sending cash in the mail, but no less, standing in line at my local Canada Post outlet to, ship, 3 or 4 packages a day. in retrospect, it was really invaluable lessons and sort of launching my interest in e-commerce and logistics. I mean, it was fundamentally that, right? I was selling on a marketplace and fulfilling orders all in my, bedroom upstairs in my parents' home. So it was a great, great experience. As I said, 25 years later, with a bit of a pause in the middle there, I continue to sell on, eBay and, other channels. But fast forward a few years, Kevin, I studied finance at McGill University in Montreal, where I went for, 4 years, and ended up seizing my operations selling sports cards that I was focused on bigger and better things in college and, trying to, get a career out of it. And upon graduating, I moved to New York, to the city where I launched my career in finance. I was at a hedge fund. That lasted a couple of years, literally 2 years. Got bored of it because, well, it's finance, as well as some of the headwinds that I think many of us can recall back in kind of 2008, 2009 were not exactly the most glorious years in financial history. And, towards the end of 2009, I actually reached out to, at the time, a little known company, a little known startup called Rent the Runway. They had, at the time, I believe they just raised their seed capital. There was an article about them in the New York Times, I believe. And I just kind of reached out to them and said, hey, this is who I am, would love to work for you. And fast forward a little bit, I think 2 weeks later, I joined them as their 5th employee, their first operations hire, kind of full-time operations hire. I had to tap into my skills that were garnered in 1999, fulfilling cards out of my family home and figure out how to fulfill women's designer dress orders. So it was a really great experience at Rent the Runway. And I then got connected through a mutual friend, I got connected with the co-founders of Birchbox, which many might recall, kind of, one of the pioneers in subscription commerce that kind of paved the way to, this whole kind of subscription box revolution of the last, call it 10 or 15 years. And decided to join the co-founders there, Haley and Katya. I joined them as their first full-time employee. So that was kind of fun to, have that stamp. And we were 2 months into that business when I joined. I believe we were fulfilling about 500 monthly orders. So really quite a small business at the time. Yeah. And ultimately, when I left 4 years later, we had just crossed about 1 million orders a month. Wow. We had operations in 5 markets, here in the United States, Canada, the UK, Spain, and France. We were working with Geodis, as a 3PL here in the United States. At the time we were OHL, but they were acquired by Geodis sometime later. And, it was really a terrific experience kind of, leading the supply chain throughout that like rapid growth, over those first 4 years.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. And I mean, very interesting. I mean, you're kind of, early days in both of those companies, but also in a sense, that was pretty like early days for this huge e-commerce boom, even in itself. Right. So I'm curious, how was that? How was that kind of navigating that from like the operational standpoint? If you look at that compared to the e-commerce landscape today, what are some of the challenges that were there then that maybe have, since been, alleviated, or not even some things that people think about now?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was probably that I'll throw myself under the bus, Kevin. It was probably inexperience. I almost wish I was, 38 back then, with 15 years of, real operations experience trying to solve the problems that I was solving when I was a 23, 24-year-old, at these businesses. I just didn't know, I didn't have a network. I didn't have a professional network. I didn't have contacts with the carriers. I couldn't spell 3PL. It's just kind of, I was learning on the fly, and I think I did a decent job, but that was a huge challenge, but also, more practically speaking, particularly, with the Birchbox experience, because, Rent the Runway, the fulfillment was all done in-house. We weren't working with outsourced partners. So that didn't make it easy necessarily, but it was a different experience. But certainly at Birchbox, with that rapid growth, thinking back, 10 or 15 years to that experience, among the bigger challenges was that partners, be it our packaging partners, our fulfillment partners, the carriers, they really didn't believe us on a month-to-month basis of like what our growth would be. They didn't believe us, and like their operations weren't built around like such rapid growth, right? Those operations are built around, typically a more traditional retailer that might grow a few percent month over month, right? 10, 20% year over year. And, at Birchbox, we were like, every month we were like, yep, we're going to grow 100%. We're going to grow 200%. We're going to go from requiring 5,000 units of that box to 13,000 units. And we need them in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then the next month it was 13,000 units to 30,000 units. And they're like, well, hold on a second, right? Like, we just can't do that, right? We need a plan. And like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, isn't this a good thing that we're growing so fast? Like, you're generating more revenue, you're happy, you're selling more, we're selling more, like we all win. So I think it was this change of perspective, or this mind change that, Bert, not to maybe give us too much credit, but I think we knocked down a lot of walls that, as I said a moment ago, paved the way to, the Bark Boxes, the Harrys, the Lolas, some of these other successful subscription businesses, the ThreadUps, all these brands, because we were the ones that said, hey, like, this is real. And like subscription e-commerce can grow really, really quickly at an accelerated pace. And you need to listen to us to perform according to our standards.
Yeah. I think it's pretty interesting to hear that, because I remember that time when Birchbox was like coming out and, just getting all this traction, and then, like you said, then you start to see like just a little while later, like a flood of all these different kind of subscription box things going on. And obviously, a lot of talk about the explosive growth that you guys are having. I mean, I'm curious from the operations side, because you were working with 3PLs on that. I mean, since this was like a relatively new concept in a sense, I mean, how did like the 3PLs, when you were approaching them, trying to find one, I mean, how did they react to this idea, like that, they need to take these things and put them together in the box? And because I'm guessing, I mean, that was a little different from, some things that they were probably traditionally doing already.
We'll be back after a quick break.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Do you want more warehouse content delivered to your inbox? Sign up for our new email series called Warehouse Wisdom Wednesday to get an educational series of emails on warehouse basics delivered directly to you every Wednesday morning. Find the sign up link in the show notes.
Yeah, I sort of alluded to it, Kevin, but they were in disbelief. It was just like it kind of like their heads exploded, right? Because this was not, I don't mean that as like a pejorative necessarily, but they never seen anything like it. Both in terms of like the scope of that specific operation, the Birchbox, the sort of kitting, the high volume kitting and assembly, custom kitting. There were a few 3PLs that are used to, bundling, like building a little gift basket, right? You put the shampoo next to the conditioner, next to the bar of soap, and you shrink wrap that, right? Like, people have been doing that since Adam and Eve. But this like dynamic monthly turn at this type of volume with this number of components, like if I recall, each box had about 15 individual components or SKUs. And, at the volume we were doing, I mean, it was significant. So it took a lot of energy to find the right fulfillment provider, to find the right 3PL that can really support that business with that scale. And, through my first 4 years of the business, I think the first 3 or 4 months, we did the fulfillment ourselves, kind of in-house. We set up a bunch of folding tables and kind of brute forced it, did it scrappy, put out a couple ads on Craigslist for some associates. And, I was kind of running the operation there. And then we said, this is crazy that we're doing it. We're not operators. We're like brand people and marketers. Let's find a 3PL. And, we worked with 3 different 3PLs throughout the first 4 years I was at the business. And it's not because anyone failed. It's just that we kind of outgrew their capacity and their needs, and our needs evolved. And, we had to kind of graduate to the next right 3PL for the business at that moment in time.
Interesting. Yeah. I think it's so interesting to hear that, because I love that you said like their heads exploded, because I can see that, because it's I mean, at the time, if you think back to that time, I mean, it was essentially, it was radically different from anything that was going on then. I mean, now, like, you think about, okay, high volume growth on e-commerce, subscription boxes, like, yeah, like, that's the norm, right? But back then, that was like totally a kind of a new thing going on. So it's very interesting to hear that. And now, I guess through that, I'm assuming here a little bit, but you had these kind of relationships with these 3PLs, and you're navigating, trying to find the right one, as you just mentioned. And I feel like maybe that's kind of how you've led now into your company's second marathon and third person as well, which is helping with those relationships. So talk to us a little bit about kind of what you took away from those experiences, and how did you take those insights and now bring them into these companies that you're now operating?
Yeah, Kevin, it was a good assumption. You really hit the nail on the head there. I started Second Marathon in 2017, so about 7 years ago, and started the business to help e-commerce brands, high growth emerging e-commerce brands, really solve a lot of the same challenges that I faced when I was kind of in-house as an ops leader at these businesses, that I was a part of, in the first marathon or first chapter of my career, kind of the impetus of the name there.
Okay.
And, for the first couple of years of Second Marathon, it was more of like a fractional operations team. We would help brands with everything from kind of soup to nuts. So, kind of think of it as what a ops manager to a VP of ops would support, D2C brand in-house. So kind of the high level strategy, as well as kind of the boots on the ground execution, worked out really well. We worked with some really fun and exciting brands. We list a bunch of them on our website. And, then COVID came around, in 2020. Unfortunately, we were well positioned to help brands, kind of being at the crossroads of e-commerce and logistics was a good place to be at for most, in kind of 2020, 21. And what we saw was that the number one service the brands were seeking our support with was helping them find the right 3PL. I think it was about 80 to 90% of the leads that reached out to us, that hit our website, that contacted us, that wanted our services were like, yeah, we don't need the planning help, the production help. We got a box guy, we're good. But like, gosh, this like 3PL world is just crazy, right? Like I can't make sense of it. Or I'm working with a 3PL and they suck, right? Yeah. They're not good for me, without naming names. And so my business partner and I decided to actually kind of, unofficially pivot into moving off this kind of fractional ops engagements into really focusing on this one service and one service only, which is essentially leading RFPs for brands looking to find their first or next 3PL, brands of all shapes and sizes, all product categories. I can't think of a product category we haven't touched, everything from, fashion, footwear and apparel, pet, food and bev, alcohol, fresh seafood, shipping salmon around the country, like literally everything. And like everyone has their own nuance. I know, Kevin, you've interviewed, the guys from Cold Chain 3PL, a couple months ago, and they're, great guys and great partners for brands that, seek that kind of cold chain experience among other things. So yeah, really decided to focus on that one service. So we've been doing that for the last really 5 years. We've been almost exclusively focused on 3PL searches. It's been wonderful. As I said, I've worked with some really kind of exciting brands, e-com brands, but what this continued to inform us, which is turned into the impetus in launching Third Person, which we did back in March, is that while we continue to hear from brands looking to find the right 3PL, unfortunately, well, I don't know if it's unfortunate, it's just the reality, Second Marathon is not a free experience for brands, right? It's a consultancy, we charge a fee for our services. We think it's a fair price, but it's not inexpensive. And what we saw was that a lot of brands were like, hey guys, this is great, but I can't afford your services, or I don't want to afford your services, or we have a team in-house that can lead the process our way. But can you just send us like a cheat sheet of 2 or 3 or 5 names of 3PLs that are a good fit for us? Just send me the crib sheet, right?
Yeah.
Can you replace Google, like in lieu of me Googling best warehouse in New Jersey or best, warehouse in Dallas or Nashville, tell me who you think in your perspective, the third person perspective is the right 3PL for us. So we said, sure, we can do that. But, Kevin, we need to know who you are, right? Like, what do you sell? How do you sell it? Where do you sell it? How much do you sell? What's important to you, right? Like, we think of this process kind of like dating, right? It's like, back, I don't know if this exists anymore with online dating apps, but, back in the day, some people would have like a matchmaker, maybe it's a mutual friend or, a parent in some cultures. And what's important to Kevin in a partner is probably different than what's important to Matt in a partner. And it's not because Kevin is right and Matt is wrong, or Matt is right and Kevin is wrong. It's just that we have different preferences, and that's great, right? That's what makes the world go around. And we think it's very similar in the kind of 3PL brand dynamics. So what we did at Second Marathon for a while, we actually had a button on our website that said, I think it said self-serve. And, brands would hit that. It would take them to a type form, Google form. They would answer a few questions. We would take that information, bang it up against our Airtable database, and basically send the brand a list of 3PLs that we think are a good fit, and said, hey, here they are. We're happy to connect you with them. Let us know who you want to talk to. And after doing this, I think the 75th time over a matter of a year, we're like, gosh, like, we should productize this.
Yeah.
We should make more, right. We should make a more elegant experience, get off emails and PDFs and Google Forms, like create something that's more automated and more dynamic. So, fast forwarding a little bit, back in March of this year, we launched Third Person, which is essentially that. It's a new platform, a discovery tool to help brands discover and connect with the right 3PL for them.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think that's such a very good thing to have, because I like you said, I mean, I hear, lots of stories too, about people have bad experiences with 3PLs. And, I think it's interesting too, that a lot of the 3PLs that we see out there, like that are small, mid-market or boutique 3PLs, you might call them, like, were started because somebody had a bad 3PL experience, right? They're like, I can do better. And I think it's very interesting, your point there about, how do you want to partner with the 3PL, and, how do you operate your business? How do they operate their business? And is there a good alignment there? So it's great that you're able to recognize that and kind of be that catalyst in a sense to be able to make those connections happen, but make the right connections happen. I think it's great that you've seen that. I love the name too, Third Person. I think it's like very clever. And I think it's really great that you've been able to do that. So, I mean, I think we touched on kind of the relationship side here and things of that nature. But, when you look at kind of fulfillment in the landscape right now, where we currently are, and, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing or that you're hearing out there in terms of fulfillment or working with a fulfillment provider or a 3PL kind of in today's current state?
Yeah, I think I'll probably answer that a couple ways, Kevin. I think on maybe a more micro level, it's really brands discovering the right partner. Cutting out the noise. Like I mentioned, used the analogy a few minutes ago. It's kind of like dating.
Yeah. And
the reason why, I don't know about you, Kevin, I trust you've heard this expression many times. I hate my 3PL.
Yeah.
This kind of adage that everyone hates their 3PL, which is not true, right? I mean, I can share dozens and dozens of brands who do not hate their 3PL. In fact, love their 3PL. But I know that there are many who do hate their 3PL. And, we think the reason is, which is the biggest challenge in our opinion, all right? And, if you didn't hate your partner, challenges would go away. Yeah. But the issue is that, for 3PLs, they are really ineffective at differentiating themselves. It's a highly fragmented market. There are many, many players, by our estimation, through different sources, we believe there are in excess of 10,000 3PLs that do e-commerce fulfillment. I know 3PL is a broad term, but who do e-commerce fulfillment just here in the United States alone.
Wow.
Right. And I've been in the business for 15 years and I don't think I've met more than maybe 300 or 400 of them.
Yeah.
Right. So there's so many, every day we meet new ones, through third person. So, on the one side of the ledger, 3PLs are really poor or, ineffective at differentiating themselves, getting in front of the right qualified leads. And brands are really poor at discovering 3PLs. Like I said, they're the most common way for a brand to discover a 3PL is via Google.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot of SEO research. They're literally Googling how to ship my hot sauce or, best way to ship my t-shirt in Dallas, in Chicago, in Jersey. Right. And that's akin to me, back in my single days living in New York, if I walked into a bar in the Lower East Side on a Friday night and said, who's female and 25 and single? And, some nice lady stands up and I said, let's get married.
Yeah.
Right. Would that work out for us? It might, but probably not. Right. We asked three important questions. The fact that she's roughly my age, she's single and female. Those are three important things to me. But I don't know about you, but there's probably a few more questions you want to ask, a partner before you decide to marry them. Right.
Yeah.
But brands treat this decision like that, right? That they can just it's transactional, right? It's commoditized, right? It's just Googling and you land on the first website that's probably, a sponsored ad and, you see a nice little cartoon that flashes across the screen and you're like, oh yeah, this is great. Let's, work with them, sign. And that's just not the right way to discover and find the right 3PL. So, I think, that's kind of on a micro level, quickly on a macro level, there are some challenges right now, obviously with what's happening in China and particularly, Section 321, that's, right now kind of a hot topic du jour, likely still will be, when this podcast goes live. The rising cost of freight, container costs from China to the US, are going up significantly. And then, I also think, the financial health of certain 3PLs, just in the last few months, we've seen, certain 3PLs or 4PLs go under, close their door. Some of them were kind of louder closures than others. I've personally heard from, I think 4 in the last 30 days that have closed down. And, these are smaller 3PLs, but it's still impactful to customers. So I think, the financial sustainability of 3PLs is something that's going to continue to be challenged in the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's pretty interesting too. And I've heard that often, right? Where, you mentioned the 3PL situation where brands are Googling and, a 3PL is paid for an ad or, they've just invested in SEO and, just because they're, the first result doesn't mean they're the best, right? They're the best fit. So I think it's great to try and highlight that and then kind of cut through that noise, as you said there, and, get to who's the right partner for you, not just the right transactional person, right? Because it is going to essentially, in some cases, could make or break your business on that relationship, right? And I've heard a lot of horror stories. I'm sure you have too, of brands really being impacted there. So it's interesting. You talked about, kind of the effectiveness of the 3PL to differentiate themselves and also kind of the financial health issues that some of them may be having as well. So, if you look at kind of the 3PL landscape or e-commerce fulfillment provider landscape overall, I know there's been, certainly a lot of suggestions and talk out there that I see about, some consolidations potentially coming, acquisitions, things like that. And, with over 10,000 providers just in the United States, like you said, what's your view on that? Do you see that there is definitely going to be more consolidation? Do you see that kind of the, spike of these 3PL providers popping up is kind of dying down? What do you see out there in the landscape of it all?
It's clear to me the path to winning new customers, i.e. longevity for 3PLs is really, embracing technology, supporting evolving, value-added needs, vast needs. And, to your point there, Kevin, like stability, maybe sustainability, financial sustainability, but I would say stability. And if we look at like tech, and that could be, either software or hardware or both. You've interviewed a few great brands and 3PLs in recent months that I'm personally very familiar with, companies like the J Group, you had the podcast with Blake and Phoenix Commerce, kind of the way that Phoenix Commerce plays into the technology there. I believe you've had on Kyle from Two Boxes some time ago, a good friend and, company that I advise personally. I mean, wonderful technology for 3PLs. You've had on Jonathan from Nimble, obviously a lot of good hardware and robotics there. So like embracing these types of, I don't want to call them trends because trends kind of insinuates short-term in nature. Like this is the future. This is how the landscape is evolving. And you could also be like having easy integration or simple integration with like new sales platforms like TikTok Shop, which is gaining market share here in the United States. So that's kind of the tech side. On the VAS side, this can be like the cliche of like handwritten note cards, which, just about everyone does, but it could be the Phoenix Commerces of the world, what they do, with pack slips and kind of repurchase. It could be like embroidery and engraving, like what Outer Space offers. I know you interviewed Kate Terry a few months back, another good friend of ours. On the stability side, this is probably the most important, but something that brands don't often think about when they're making this decision. I wish they did. But, while new is cool and fun and exciting, there is peace of mind that exists in working with a partner that is tried and true. Like, here in Nashville, there's a commercial that comes on all the time that it goes something like, "We're not good because we're old because we're good." And I think that's really fitting.
Yeah.
There's something to say about a generational business, someone who has 20, 30, 60 years of experience, that they've seen a lot, right? And like it works, and they'll probably be here for another 60 years. That said, that can also nip you in the bud as the age may like serve as, blinders on, what's new and necessary to kind of stay modern and, stay with it, for lack of a better word. But, there certainly is a level of clarity in working with an experienced partner. And I think, the stability component is something that's really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an interesting point too about that balance between, experience, like, if they've been operating for 30 years, right? An example. And then, their ability to also embrace what's new, right? I mean, like going back to the beginning of our conversation, right? You're talking about Birchbox and you're going to 3PLs and it's like blowing their mind, their head is exploding about like, how do we do something like this, right? But I'm sure they had experience too, as operators, but now something new is happening. So how can they work and pivot to be able to embrace some of that and become that partner that they need to become, but still bringing in, that acumen that they've developed over time to that as well. And I think it's a very interesting balance to find there. So I'm curious, I mean, we talked a little bit about 3PLs sucking and people hating their 3PLs, right? And some of the challenges there. But if you were to give advice to somebody that's, just starting a 3PL or has a fairly young 3PL, I mean, what would be like the one piece of advice you would give them?
From the 3PL's perspective, I would tell them to be very like every client that you bring on is like a marriage, right? Like it's hard for me to buck that kind of dating analogy. Be very, if I had a nickel for every time a 3PL was kind of in that true startup phase, like trying to bring on every piece of revenue, whether they're doing 10 orders a day or 1,000 orders a day, they're trying to be everything to everyone. And then a year later or 2 years later, they come to me and they say, "Oh gosh, like, we hate these clients. They're, 20% of our revenue, but 80% of our headache." And I said, well, why don't determine what your ICP is, what your ideal client profile is. And that could be anything. I mean, that could be the 10 a day shippers, or it can be the 1,000 a day shippers, but it can't be both. Stick to that ICP and treat onboarding a new client and working with a new client as someone that you're marrying, someone you want to be with for a very long time. And be thoughtful, right? Because this isn't software. The 3PL business is not software. It doesn't scale logarithmically. It scales fairly linearly. And the pain of bringing on a customer who's not a good fit for you is significant. So be really, really mindful. It's a two-way street, right? The brand should be mindful of who they are marrying, who they are partnering with. But it goes both ways. The 3PL should be just as thoughtful on who they bring on as new customers.
Definitely. And I think that's great advice there. And I think there's times where, it's eager to get volume, right? Because volume equals revenue in most cases. But then, like you said, you end up later on, like, I don't like this client. Like, this client is like a pain, basically, right? And you end up, kind of in a bad spot. So I think that's great advice there from you, Matt. And, I really appreciate you coming on the show here and talking to me. I think we could probably talk for like another hour, maybe. But, definitely very insightful stuff from you, and great to hear from all your experiences too, within not only the e-commerce world, but then the logistics and fulfillment world as well. So if people want to get in touch with you, they want to learn more about Third Person, Second Marathon, subscribe to your newsletter, which is fantastic as well, what's the best way to do all of that?
I guess the best way to consolidate all that is probably finding me on LinkedIn. If you look up Matthew Hertz, I think it's linkedin.com/Hertz, I think is my tag there. But yeah, you can find me online. Check out our website, thirdperson.co.co or secondmarathon.com, our two businesses. And yeah, we'd love to chat about fulfillment and 3PLs with anyone.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well, so people can easily find it. So Matt, thank you once again, and appreciate your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.